In the 1960s, James Earl Ray, a well-known criminal with a lengthy criminal past, was at the top of the Federal Bureau of Investigation's most wanted list. Despite being constantly monitored and imprisoned in a maximum security facility, he attempted 2 escapes. He was one of the most sought-after people in the United States of America because he employed a range of clever escape routes. Despite growing up in a chaotic household, James saw his father's life path, which eventually led him to commit theft and fraud in the same area. During his travels around the United States, he moved from one state to another and city to another, eventually becoming a con artist and a burglar. His first arrest and conviction for stealing happened in the state of California in 1949. In 1952, he was captured while trying to rob a taxi driver in Illinois and sentenced to 2 years in jail. During his 2 years in jail, James made many fruitless attempts to break free. After serving his term, he was released from prison and returned to see other convicts on several occasions. In 1959, James was sentenced to 20 years in jail for the 4th time for armed robbery, and his sentence was extended for the 4th time. Despite his lengthy criminal record, he continued to steal money, which may have been devastating to society if he made a mistake while conducting the crime. James was permitted to spend time in Missouri, where he devised the ideal plan to escape his jail term. Throughout his time at the prison bakery, he formed strong bonds with both his fellow convicts and his staff. On April 23, 1967, James buried himself in a container filled with bread before topping himself with the whole container. It was required for him to mislead the guards in order to release this, and one of his colleagues, who seemed to have a leg injury, sought to call the guards. To evade the guards, James hid under a cardboard box and wrapped himself with bread. He spent hours hiding inside the box, poking little holes in it so he could breathe through it, knowing he would die without oxygen. James was able to abandon the junkyard and make his way into the woods, despite the fact that aircraft and helicopters were looking for him. He thereafter moved to Chicago, Canada, and then Mexico, where he participated in unusual activities and made pornographic films. He ultimately visited Mexico. According to a quick synopsis, James Earl Ray was a well-known criminal with a lengthy history of unlawful activity and dodging prosecution. In order to escape his circumstances, he used a number of inventive strategies, eventually becoming one of the most sought-after individuals in the United States. After escaping from jail in March 1968, James Earl Ray returned to the United States, but he was not widely sought after due to a lack of surveillance cameras and other technical advances. He went out and purchased a Remington rifle with a 7x zoom sight, intending to use it for hunting. He drove to Memphis, Tennessee, and spent the night at a motel across the street from the Lorraine Motel. On April 4, 1968, James opened the bathroom window and shot his handgun at a man standing on the Lorraine Hotel's balcony, killing him. James was one of the most sought-after targets by the Federal Bureau of Investigation in the United States. Therefore, a huge number of security agents were sent to find him. James was used to working in law enforcement and security, but this time things were different. He had spent his whole life avoiding them, but this time he was more determined than ever before. He left the United States of America and travelled north to Canada, where he presented a forged Canadian passport that allowed him to board a flight heading for London. Following that, he travelled to Portugal, where he attempted to get a post as a mercenary in Africa. He returned to London via Heathrow Airport, where he protested his intention to go to Africa using a counterfeit Canadian passport. Because airport security was suspicious of him, his actual identity and the fact that he was one of the most wanted people in the United States were exposed. On June 8, 1968, James was arrested at Heathrow Airport more than 2 months after Martin Luther King was assassinated. During the trial, he admitted to murdering King. However, he then withdrew his testimony, claiming that he did so because he was frightened of being put to death. If he denied guilt and refused to confess, his lawyer warned him that he may face a jury trial and be executed. After some time had passed, James decided to recant his confession, stating that he had just revealed the information in order to escape being penalized for his actions. They told him that they had all of the evidence, including his fingerprints, weapon and room, and that he was a part of a group that had murdered Martin Luther King without his knowledge. James's advocacy for black rights drew widespread criticism, yet racial segregation persisted in the United States. While James was detained, his brother Jerry paid him a visit and requested discreet help in smuggling a small saw into the institution. Jerry and James agreed to construct a secret code that only Jerry, Jerry's brother, could decode. Jerry and James had put the saw into his shoe without his awareness, making it difficult for the guards to see. Jerry made a visit to his jailed brother, and throughout their stay they exchanged shoes and clothing from outside sources. These things included jail outfits, underwear, clothing, and hygiene supplies. Jerry had previously brought shoes that were equivalent to them with the intention of delivering them to him. Jim, a prisoner, was assigned the task of escaping out of his cell by destroying fan bars positioned along the pipe path. After putting in a lot of work over 4 months, he was ultimately able to build the fan out of strong metal pieces. Nonetheless, the fan couldn't bend or twist, so James had to use a pipe wrench to bend the fan blades. One night, his close friend Jake Morlock, who was either a fisherman or a plumber when he was inside, provided him with a pipe wrench. However, James's cell was the only one in the facility, and Jim and Jake were sent to different cells. In order to allow Jake to access his cell, James modified his identification on a list and gave him the function of cellmate. Nonetheless, since this was a risky venture, he needed to work it out correctly. On a day off, James dispatched replacement guards to replace the regular guards, who were fewer in number and unfamiliar with the convicts held on this block. Jim and Jake entered their cell while guards were watching, as per the escape date of May 2, 1971. Because it was the final time the guards would be with the convicts until the morning count at 6 o'clock, they were instructed to remain in the cell until dawn. Following the preparation of a blood-soaked bed pillow, James and Jake hastily entered the ventilation aperture and used the pipe wrench to twist the fan blades, creating a tiny entrance for themselves. James, however, was unable to do so due to his big size. James attempted to return to the ventilation hole, but when he opened the cover, he was surprised by the steam coming from the aperture and the pipes linked to it. As he reached this gateway, he realized it would be similar to entering hell. Because of the location's vulnerability, one of the guards stationed on the watchtowers was forced to make a quick decision: either stay in his cell and abandon his escape plan, or risk placing himself in danger. When James tried to descend down the hatch, he discovered that the heat and steam below were quite painful. The jail was supplied with heat, energy and steam via ancient pipes. Unfortunately, the insulation on these pipes had worn away, allowing the heat to continue unabated. James realized his error and climbed the ladder to the hatch again before exiting. Unfortunately, the guards observed the steam pouring from the opening and captured James shortly after he emerged from the hatch. After being led to a separate room for interrogation, his friend Jake and the ventilation hole in his cell were revealed to him. He was carried to the room. Jerry, James's brother, was waiting outside the jail to help him escape arrest. Jerry waited for his brother until morning came, having brought money and a pistol with him. Jerry went home after concluding that the procedure was most likely unsuccessful. After almost 2 years of futile efforts to escape imprisonment, James R. Ray, a prisoner, was eventually captured. Following 2 months in isolation, he was sentenced to life in jail. James spent considerable time studying the potential of a new escape path, and in 1977 he discovered a gap in the prison wall where the mountain below it met. James called Doc Shelton, a prisoner acquaintance who had previously attempted to get out of many other jails before to this one. James presented the proposal to him, and he liked it since it was simple, straightforward, and something that could be done. He was hired to help out at the prison workshop, where they did bodywork and worked on metal pipes. James was able to sneak a little pipe out of the room every day, despite the fact that the guards were keeping a close check on the pipes. He worked until they had enough pipes to build the ladder, at which time he added Earl Hill, his cellmate, to the squad. The second portion, the escape operation, was planned by James and his accomplices. Because of the presence of the guards, it was unable to build a ladder and then run with it through the yard. Instead, they planned to put up the ladder while there was still time to escape. It's probable that the metal pipes would be hidden near to the wall where the mountain wall meets the jail wall. The guards couldn't see the pipes since they were running down from the earth. They were instructed to stand slightly above this spot and gaze down, which was an effective method of concealing pipes until the evacuation was complete. During this time, they were also examining the guards' routines, which was a weakness since there was no funding to recruit more guards. Tower 4, the closest of the watchtowers, was the one that concerned them the most. Floyd Hawkes worked as a security guard on the tower from which they sought to escape. James and his friends saw Hawkes' habit of carrying a newspaper and reading it while ignoring the yard and the inmates. James and his friends were aware that this was a weakness that they might use as part of their escape plan. The jail had much fewer guards than inmates, and they were highly armed. James and his pals were able to easily watch the guards' actions, and they were aware that they might use this weakness in order to escape. When James, who was confined, wanted to get free, he contacted his brother Jerry for help. James first approached his brother for money, but he could only supply him with little quantities due to the prison's own mini-economy. He then requested his brother to send him a bag with critical goods, such as hair colour, a jacket, medication, bandages, and non-perishable canned food. On Friday, June 10, 1977, they decided to depart after accumulating a sufficient amount of metal pipes. James and his friends spotted metal pipes in a tunnel near where they planned to escape the wall. They intended to build a ladder out of these pipes in order to divert the guards' attention and distraction. James provided money to many detainees in order to create a camouflage system. Because the convicts outnumbered the police in the jail, any disturbance would distract their focus. After calculating that now was the greatest chance for them to depart, James ordered the inmates to begin an attack. There were 3 or 4 guards in the yard at the time, and they were focusing on the commotion in an attempt to calm things down and separate the convicts. Guard Floyd Hawkes was asleep and oblivious of the event. James and his comrades swiftly constructed the pipes and positioned the ladder on the wall to assure his safety and ease of crossing. A number of convicts gathered in the yard swiftly ascended the ladder. 6 convicts managed to escape using the ladder in a matter of seconds, bringing the total number of inmates to 6. David Powell, who worked in the prison kitchen and was the last person to successfully escape, wore white cookware. When one of the guards at the watchtower saw that the prisoner was dressed in white, he pointed his gun toward the stairs and shot the prisoner standing behind him. Jerry Words, who was confined, had a tumble, causing the stairs to crumble beside him. In addition to the inmates' screaming and celebration, which could be heard over the wall, the yard was completely disorganized. Floyd Hooks, the security guard, awakened from his slumber after being shot by a co-worker. He subsequently fell to the ground while trying to collect his weapon, but he failed. His session was made ineffectual since 6 inmates escaped. The jail's director and other guards would lay the finger of blame at James and his associates, although the institution had other problems that were not the result of James's negligence and laziness. The director of the jail and the guards must accept responsibility for the situation. Nonetheless, the prison had various other problems in addition to his negligence and indolence. The security forces and police were unable to react appropriately to the escape of 6 criminals from a small jail in a community of about 500 people. One of the detainees that escaped was James Earl. The hilly terrain made exploring and escaping difficult. James and his companions went their own ways, each heading in the direction of James. They tried to approach Route 116, the cemetery where his brother buried the bag of supplies. However, it was dark, making it difficult to locate him despite their best attempts. James was able to escape from jail, but the mayhem that ensued was caused by the fact that he ran everywhere and was unable to locate himself due to the darkness of the deep forest. After many hours of looking, he gave up trying to locate the road, the cemetery, and the bag that his brother had left for him. The guards found the first attempt to run some hours later, and they immediately started searching for the suspect. James was left to fend for himself in the wilderness with no direction, and 2 days had passed since his escape. James was not among the 4 convicts that were returned. It had been 48 hours since he had eaten, drank or slept, and he was still wandering through the jungle without a trail. James pursued the dogs for hours until daylight, when they saw him and began circling and barking over his head. Law, police and security personnel dispatched the dogs to look for them on the ground. After being captured, James returned to Brushy Mountain Prison. However, his attempt to run was unsuccessful since the 6th and last fugitive was apprehended shortly after his 2nd attempt. After some inquiry, James determined that if he had chosen the other escape path, he would have been able to reach both the main street and the cemetery. Because he took the wrong road, he got bewildered in the jungle, and his eventual location was 20 kilometers from the jail. Following his unsuccessful attempt to run, James Earl was captured, and he was sentenced to another year in jail. This incident received widespread coverage in newspapers and media outlets all around the world. James spent the rest of his life in prison until his death from illness in 1998, despite the fact that he claimed innocence and was exploited as a scapegoat for Martin Luther King's assassination.